In this video, I'm going to name every NFL team's most overrated player right now for 2023. Just remember that me calling a player overrated doesn't mean I think they're bad. Well, I mean, some of the players on this list I do think are bad and still get hyped up for whatever reason, but that's not always the case, alright? Anyway, let's just start the video. Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray. Murray has won Offensive Rookie of the Year and made 2 Pro Bowls, but in 4 seasons after being picked first overall, he really hasn't had a dominant season or the type of season that puts himself in the elite category of quarterbacks. Despite this, the Cardinals are paying him like one, and his name still carries a lot of weight for a guy that, when you really boil it down, hasn't come close to accomplishing anything in the NFL yet. Now that he's slated to miss most of 2023, he'll be 5 years into the league with 1 playoff appearance, which was a horrible one-and-done showing. Atlanta Falcons, Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts had a respectable rookie year going for 1,000 yards, although he still had just 1 touchdown. Before last season, completely torpedoing, finishing with under 400 yards receiving and missing 7 games due to injury. If you want to live up to the hype when being picked 4th overall as a tight end like Pitts was in 2021, you better become the next Gronk or Kelsey. And so far, Pitts hasn't been anything close. Perhaps a change of scenery or a trade would help rejuvenate his career. Baltimore Ravens, Odell Beckham Jr. Through 3 seasons after watching Odell, I thought he was going to become one of the 5 or 6 greatest wide receivers of all time. His first 3 years were that good. Unfortunately, injuries hit and he hasn't been the same, but his name is still that of a superstar, when really the last great season he had objectively came way back in 2016. He missed all of 2022 with injury, and although I think he still has the capability of being a good receiver, the days of him being a superstar receiver are long gone, unless you're talking about somebody taking a massive dump on your chest. Allegedly. Buffalo Bills, Von Miller. This is a great example of a player that I don't think is bad, but I do think has to prove himself as Von Miller is getting up there in age, as he missed 7 games last season. When he's been healthy, he's been productive, maybe not as productive as he was back in the mid to late 2010s, but he can still be serviceable, we think. It's yet to be determined if at age 34 he can bounce back from another major injury. Remember, he missed all of 2020 while still keeping his superstar status. But as of this moment in time, he's overrated, due to people just assuming he'll bounce right back and continue to be elite. Carolina Panthers, Adam Thielen. Thielen remains a big name despite the fact that he hasn't had over 1,000 yards receiving in a season since 2018, his last truly great year. Although back in 2020 he did catch 14 touchdown passes. In each of the last 2 years he's caught under 800 yards and his play has steadily declined, but because of his name and because he's a scrappy gym rat Wes Welker clone, people might continue to think he's slightly better than he actually is. Honestly, there aren't really many players on Carolina that get overrated because nobody really expects them to do anything. So Thielen is the odd man out here, but a hardworking odd man out, a deceptively athletic odd man out. Chicago Bears, Justin Fields. Right now, I don't think there is a wider gap between people who think Justin Fields is good and people who are smart and realize that he fucking sucks. Justin Fields is my vote for the most overrated player in the league right now. He's getting MVP consideration. He even got an MVP vote last year somehow, despite the fact that he's never thrown for 300 yards in any game of his career. I say the same thing every time when I talk about Justin Fields. He's the type of guy that'll make 1 or 2 amazing athletic plays, which he does, and those go on the highlight reel, and all of the moronic NFL fans, they eat it up and they say, wow, this guy's really good, and then you look at his stats at the end of the game, and he's thrown for 115 yards and an interception, and his team is lost by 20, which is what the Bears were all of last season outside of a couple games. He's a great runner for a quarterback, but the most important job of being a quarterback is being able to throw the ball and get the ball out on time and not take drive-killing sacks, which Justin Fields is historically awful at, as his first 2 seasons in the league prove. He's not good. Like, he's not good at all. I would be stunned if he became a good NFL player. Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Mixon. Mixon's name still packs a punch, despite the fact that he's never really been a super efficient yards per attempt guy. Outside of his huge 5-touchdown day versus Carolina, Mixon essentially did next to nothing. He's still thought of as a respectable running back, but I don't really know anymore. I will say at least he's well respected by the kids in his neighborhood. Cleveland Browns, Groper Cleveland. First of all, the last time Deshaun Watson played a full season was in 2020, and although he had amazing numbers in that season, the team still went just 4-12. And remember, this is before all the off-field shit came out. The thing is, people still expect Deshaun Watson to be good, but when he played last season, he wasn't just not good, he was really, really terrible on the field. I understand some of that that might have been some rust from being away for too long, but I mean, the guy was really bad, and I think a lot of people are simply overlooking that and just assuming he'll go back to being Houston Watson on the field. Basically, people still consider Watson a superstar level quarterback when we don't even know if he's actually good anymore. Also, the other day during the Hall of Fame game when DeMarcus Ware was giving a sensational rendition of the national anthem, Deshaun Watson didn't put his hand over his heart, which is honestly the worst thing he's ever done. I'm throwing up right now. Dallas Cowboys, Tyron Smith. Same as last year's edition of this video. Smith hasn't played more than 13 games in the season since 2015. And while he's never been the most durable, the last 3 years have really taken it to another level. He missed 14 games 3 years ago, 6 games 2 years ago, and 13 games last year. Despite this, he's still one of the most popular offensive linemen in the league as a byproduct of playing for the Cowboys. I guess you could say when he's healthy, he's still good, but the problem is he's never healthy. And you know what they say, the best ability is availability. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Could it be anybody else? Wilson will be in the Hall of Fame someday, and when Denver traded for him before last season, they expected to get back to the relevancy they had not seen since the Peyton Manning years. Unfortunately, their shittiness continued because Russ was absolutely terrible. And that's not to say that he didn't get a lot of criticism, because he did, but he is one of the very few players whose celebrity goes beyond the field, as he's married to a quote-unquote pop star in Sierra and is raising the son of the rapper Future. All those corny jokes are fine and dandy when you're throwing 35 touchdowns a year, but when you're putting up Davis Mills numbers, they stop being funny. Okay, maybe they're still funny, but Russ needs to bounce back, or else Future might continue to release music. Detroit Lions, Jameson Williams. It's kind of hard to figure out who's the most overrated player on the Lions, because they've prided themselves as a scrappy underdog team, and for the most part, their good players aren't too overrated, so I went with a guy who was a 12th overall pick last year and has been nothing but an absolute bomb, yet people still talk about him as part of the future. Jameson Williams has 2 touches of the ball in the NFL in his career. One of them was a 41-yard touchdown, and the other was a 40-yard run, so he has 40.5 yards per touch, which isn't bad. Unfortunately, he was injured for most of last season, and he's going to miss a bunch of games this year because he was suspended for gambling on the league. If the Lions are going to complete their rebuild into a legitimate team, whiffing on this 12th overall pick will only make it tougher. Green Bay Packers, David Bakhtiari. Bakhtiari has been living off of his reputation for a couple years now. The last time he received any individual awards was back in 2020 when he still missed 4 games, and since then he's played in just 12 games over the last 2 seasons, yet is still incredibly highly regarded. That's not to say that he isn't good anymore when he plays, but he has to prove that he can once again get back to his former pre-injury level of play, like several other members on this list, to show that he's not being overrated. To be quite honest with you, I'm surprised he hasn't joined the Jets yet. Will he be able to play his first full season this year since 2019? I doubt it. Houston Texans, Jimmy Ward. It was extremely difficult to pick a player for the Houston Texans because, first of all, I don't think the common fan knows a lot of the players on the Texans because they've been complete dog shit for the last 4 or 5 years. That said, I do think that their free agent signing of cornerback Jimmy Ward got a little more press than it probably would have for any other team, considering that in 9 seasons, Ward has just 7 interceptions and is a particularly average player. Last year, he allowed the most receptions in the league when targeted, according to Pro Football Focus. So if you're a Texans fan, and you're expecting Ward to transform your defense, expect something else. Indianapolis Colts, Quentin Nelson. The decline of Quentin Nelson is legitimately puzzling. He was first-team All-Pro each of his first 3 seasons, and it was all pretty well earned. Starting in 2021, entering what should have been the beginning part of his prime, his play has seemingly dropped noticeably, and it continued to be at that mediocre level last year, despite his play declining noticeably over the last 2 seasons. When talking about the best guards in the league, Nelson's name quickly comes up, even though he hasn't played that way in almost 3 years. Can he get back to his former elite form? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Z. Jacksonville Jaguars, Travon Walker. At the time when the Jaguars made Walker the first overall pick in 2022, there was a lot of questions and puzzlement surrounding it. And through 1 year, he has done really nothing to silence those doubters. His rookie season was merely just okay. 3.5 sacks and a couple tackles for loss. That would have been fine if he was a mid-round pick, but first overall pick is supposed to be dominant. And because there's really no other players in the Jaguars that I think get too much credit, I'm going to go with the guy who I think has the most to prove. If Walker doesn't burst out and become a double-digit sack guy this year, I'd be very, very concerned if I was a Jacksonville fan. Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes. No, I'm just kidding. See, I made you shit your pants there for a split second, didn't I? No, the real answer to me was tough, but I guess I went with Nick Bolton. He's your typical guy who makes a ton of tackles, but is somewhat limited as a pass coverage linebacker, which is very, very important in today's NFL. Despite his incredible tackle numbers, he also graded out as just merely okay, despite lots of Chiefs fans acting like he's a superstar. Again, he's not a bad player, but I don't think he's Ray Lewis or Luke Kuechly or Patrick Willis, whatever. All I'm saying is Chiefs fans, don't give him his gold jacket just yet. Las Vegas Raiders, Marcus Peters. Peters is a big name because he used to be arguably the best ball hawk in the NFL. 3 times leading the league in interception return yards and twice leading in pick sixes. But he missed all of 2021, and he hasn't made a Pro Bowl since 2019. Last year with Baltimore, he allowed a terrible passer rating average against, and his grades over the last 2 healthy seasons of his career have been pretty average. Basically, he's just another in a long line of washed up players to end up with the Raiders. Big name, little impact. Not my Jimmy Garoppolo, though. Los Angeles Chargers, Khalil Mack. Mack still has a superstar name, despite not having played like one in several years. His last truly great season came back in 2020, but his last 2 years have merely been just average. He's not a bad player still, but he's not the dominant force that he once was, and I think once Chargers fans and NFL fans wrap their heads around that, he won't be overrated anymore. Will he finally get back to double-digit sacks in a season for the first time since 2018? I doubt it. Los Angeles Rams, Cam Akers. I really didn't know who to put here because the Rams are in a rebuilding mode, and there really aren't a lot of players currently on their roster that are super hyped up outside of Aaron Donald, justifiably so, and maybe Matt Stafford, but I see as many detractors as supporters for Stafford. So I went with Cam Akers, who has gotten a lot of opportunities with the Rams over the last 3 seasons when healthy, despite the fact that he's pretty mid. He did end last season really well, though, so maybe he can carry that momentum into this season, but so far I don't understand why he gets so many opportunities in the Rams system. Miami Dolphins, Raheem Mostert. Mostert has a career yards per attempt average of 5.4, which is amazing. The problem with Mostert is that he can never stay healthy. He stayed healthy for most of last year, though, although, of course, he missed a playoff game versus Buffalo with an injury. But in the previous 2 seasons with San Francisco, he appeared in just 9 games. He's a good player, and he has a big name thanks largely to his one-time amazing performance versus the Packers a couple years ago in the playoffs. But he's such a freaking tease because every time he starts to play well or he has a big game and you start to think, wow, this guy's really good, he gets hurt or something goes wrong, and he just never ends up amounting to much more than a solid player. Minnesota Vikings, Harrison Smith. Some people might expect Kirk Cousins here, but Kirk Cousins, much like Stafford, to me gets almost as much hate as he does love. So, however, Harrison Smith is the one guy who's been with the Vikings for 11 years, and you never really hear much about him or what he's doing or if he's declined, and it's kind of weird. 5 or 6 years ago, he was one of the better safeties in the league, and he's still not a terrible player, but if you look at his PFF grading over the last several years, it's just continued to get lower and lower, and yet he just flies under the radar despite being a big name. It's just funny to me, I've never really heard any Harrison Smith criticism at all. Maybe it's there, but I haven't seen any of it ever. I'd love for him to date my daughter, though. New England Patriots, Juju Smith-Schuster. Schuster was the big splash in free agency for the Patriots this year after winning a Super Bowl with Kansas City last year, but much like the Patriots in the post-Brady era, they haven't been able to find that stud receiver or tight end despite spending a lot of capital there. Schuster once looked like a budding superstar when in 2018 he had 111 catches for over 1,400 yards, but he's never come close to approaching those numbers ever again. Call it the Antonio Brown effect. In reality, Schuster is a solid number 3 receiver, but on New England, he's arguably their number 1 receiver, which does not spell good things for their offense this season. Simply put, look past the big name and you get a possession receiver. New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara. Kamara has slowly but surely gotten worse in each of the last several seasons, especially since 2020 when he had a league-high 21 touchdowns, which coincidentally was Drew Brees' last season. He has just 13 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, and his yards per touch from scrimmage have gone down noticeably. Plus, he's probably going to be suspended for some off-field crap that happened in Las Vegas a couple years ago. So you're better off just ignoring this guy instead of thinking he's still one of the better backs in the league. At this point in time, I would say he is an inferior prototype of Austin Eckler, and not close to what he once was. New Jersey large people, Darren Waller. Waller has always gotten a lot of publicity since 2019 for being a great feel-good story of overcoming drug addiction. But after back-to-back 1,100-yard seasons in 2019 and 2020, Waller has had trouble staying on the field, and when he's been on the field, he has been as productive as he was in his top 2 years. He was signed by the Giants and is currently being hailed by Giants fans as the guy to put the Giants offense over the top, which is hilarious for a team with Daniel Jones at quarterback, but I simply think Waller is getting too much credit and hasn't had a truly good season since 2020. New York Jets, Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and a future first ballot Hall of Famer, but he was legitimately bad last season outside of like 2 or 3 games, which unsurprisingly featured the Bears and Cowboys. After winning back-to-back MVPs in 2020 and 2021, his really bad 2022 season has left things up in the air. Will 2023 and beyond just be a continuation of his decline, or will he bounce back and be motivated on a new team and finally break through to win his second Super Bowl while once again being one of the best quarterbacks in the league? We'll have to wait and see, but all I know is that if it's in a big moment in the fourth quarter, for all of his greatness, he's been very, very inconsistent in those spots. Just want Jets fans to know this. Philadelphia Eagles, Jordan Davis. With such a basically perfect roster, it's so hard to say which player is overrated. I know a bunch of haters will say Jalen Hurts, even though he was one of the best players in the league last year and throws a bunch of dimes with regularity and is an incredible runner. But my pick is Jordan Davis. To me, he has to get in better shape so he can be on the field more so he can have more of an impact. And his impact was real, especially in the run game, but he missed 4 games, and I think there's still so much more to get out of his superhuman strength and size. He also didn't grade out that well or was anything special. If he takes a massive year 2 leap and his former Georgia teammate and now current teammate Jalen Carter becomes one of the better defensive rookies in the league, the Eagles could somehow be even better than they were last year, at least until the sod father compromises the field in the Super Bowl again. Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee Harris. Just look at this photo. Look at this fucking photo, okay? Najee Harris is Trent Richardson with better PR, okay? The guy has no vision. In each of his 2 seasons, he's averaged under 4 yards a carry, and I know all of his fanboys, which is the reason why he's on my overrated list, always talk about how he has no offensive line. Well, I'll spin it around on you. I'll say that the Steelers linemen have no good fucking starting running backs to take advantage of the holes they create. The only thing Najee Harris is good at is pass protection, which is not something you spend a first-round pick on a running back for, if you spend a first-round pick on a running back at all. I guarantee if the Steelers gave Jaylen Warren the amount of carries they give Najee Harris, their offense would skyrocket. San Francisco 49ers, Deebo Samuel. What exactly is Deebo Samuel? Is he a receiver? Is he a running back? I don't know. He was first-team All-Pro at receiver in 2021 when he had over 1,400 yards receiving, and in the first 8 games of 2021, he averaged a stellar 109 yards per game catching the ball by only having 11 carries. But in the 20 games since then, 49ers have begun using him like a utility player as opposed to a guy who could be one of the better receivers in the league, as he's averaged only 53 yards per game and caught 3 touchdown catches over the last 20 games, aka about a season and a half. Despite this, he's considered one of the better receivers in the league when really all we have to go on is one excellent half season that happened almost 2 years ago. As a football player, he's a great football player, but saying that he's one of the best receivers in the league just objectively isn't true. But it's not due to lack of talent, it's just due to coaching. But either way, it overrates him. Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf. This is almost a by default selection because Metcalf is a very good player, but he is one of the only few players that really gets any hype at all on the Seahawks ever since Wilson left. The biggest reason he's here is because I feel like he could be even better than he is. And now that he has disclosed the fact that he has the eating habits of somebody who belongs on My 600-Pound Life, one can only wonder that if he had a proper diet, if he could be the best receiver in the league. But he's just so genetically gifted that he's still a 1,000-yard type of guy. I think he has more to get out of his talent, and I think he could have a 1,500-yard type of season eventually. eventually. But for now, he stays overrated. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Devin White. There is no player right now whose raw stats paint a larger picture between how good they are and how terrible they are. Looking at just Devin White's raw stats, you would think this guy is Ray Lewis. But once you dig a little deeper, you realize he is constantly missing tackles, constantly out of position, and constantly gives up a bunch of passes and touchdowns in pass coverage. And I do laugh because he has never, ever been considered good by Pro Football Focus. And I know PFF's grades aren't end-all be-all, but I think for the most part they give a pretty good idea of how good a player is, and I just think it's hilarious that they absolutely hate Devin White. But there is still a disturbing amount of people who think he's actually good because his good plays are so good and amazing because he's a freak athlete that he makes this list. Tennessee Titans, DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins hasn't played more than 10 games in each of the last 2 seasons, some due to suspension and some due to injury. He hasn't had a great season since 2020, and sadly, it appears as though his career is winding down, similar to several other recent wide receiver greats. Not only does PFF agree that he's declined individually over the last several years, but as we've already seen before with Randy Moss, Andre Johnson, and Julio Jones, Tennessee is basically the place where former All-Pro receivers go to get put down like a 15-year-old dog with bad arthritis. Please pray for Tennessee hotel room work. And finally, the Washington whatevers, Chase Young. Young was the second overall pick in 2020 and won the Defensive Rookie of the Year award when he had 7.5 sacks and a pretty solid overall rookie year. But thanks to a devastating knee injury he suffered midway through his second season, he's played in just 12 games over the last 2 seasons, accumulating just 1.5 sacks. Despite the fact that through 3 seasons he has just 9 career sacks and hasn't ever shown that he can be a dominant player outside of maybe a couple plays, Young still has superstar status and is considered one of the better players on Washington. As of this moment, we don't even know if he's the 3rd best Washington defensive lineman. Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, and Montez Sweat are all better. It's also disturbing that Chase Young's name literally translates to Karl Malone. Hey, isn't this weird? I just noticed Chase Young has 13 career tackles for loss. 13. What an interesting number.